time passes and things change. And making a decision now about the rest of your life can be very daunting. And it's also very daunting to try and give you advice about how to do that. So I think today is about shifting your paradigm or your way of thinking about this decision. So there's not going to be a huge amount of advice as such, because none of you are the same. We're all different, and that's a wonderful reality of God's creation, that you're all different, and every couple is different. So I can't stand here and say that every couple's struggle is the same, every couple's strength is the same, this strategy will work perfectly. So we're going to just try and break down the concepts around making this decision. And there still are some practical things you can do, because it is an active process. You are engaged in a process with God and with this person. So there are practical things, but there's no hard and fast rules about how to make this decision. But there are some things that can give you certainty, some things that can give you assurance that as you go through the motions, however you choose to do that, that you have assurance that this is the path for you. So finding the one is an internal search. So that's where our paradigm is going to shift, which I won't go too much into, because there's a short video that really, if I just showed you that video, that would be enough for the talk. But we need to fill some time. So we'll get into that, but just start thinking about that concept, that search for the one. Is that really an outward experience or an outward looking, or is it an inward looking process? Which one do I press? No. Tech. Okay. I listened to Abuna's talk from last week just to get some context about what you've heard. And he introduced an idea. He didn't spend too much time on it, but he said, how can I make a long-term decision with short-term information? And that's essentially what you're being asked to do in trying to find a partner. You're trying to assess with short-term information, the current, the now, the personality traits you can see in a person today, and trying to make a decision about a life that you've got no idea is going to be like. Life changes a lot between the time you meet someone, between then getting married, and then your life together. Children alone are a huge shift in the relationship, and everything changes. So how can I kind of assess today, with this limited information, that this is the person that will be the one today and the one in the future? And that is really hard if you try and think about it really closely. So I thought, what is it at this stage where you're trying to find a person? What is it that you can learn about someone through the process of dating? What can you learn about each other at this stage? You can just kind of shout out ideas. Same? Sorry? Values, yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, good. Likes, dislikes, interests. What else? Yeah, excellent. How they deal with pressure. Priorities, excellent. What about how they deal in other relationships is a really important eye-opener. So how do they treat their parents? Are they obedient? Are they kind, and do they speak nicely? Or are they aggressive and short? And, because you, beyond the romance, you will become their comfort zone. And what are they doing in their comfort zone today is a bit of a reflection on or what you can expect in a relationship when they do get comfortable. So how they treat other people in their lives. So So you can actually learn a lot at this stage. So you might think, well, I'm not too limited in my information. I can kind of get a pretty accurate picture of who this person is. If we spend enough time together, I'm going to know about their personality. I'm going to know what their priorities are. I'm going to know how they deal under pressure. I know how they manage finances. I know how they make decisions. So I can kind of get a pretty good picture of who they are. So why is it that this information is considered short term? Why is it not assumed long term? And the idea is, as I mentioned before, that your context changes. So it might not be dramatic changes in the personality, or you have enough information that you can kind of predict in other circumstances how they would be, but your context changes dramatically. And things that are unexpected happen. You know, God forbid there are health issues, you know, other dramas in life. You know, life will throw curveballs at you, and those things that you assessed your decision on initially, do they withstand the test of this time and the test of these challenges? And you simply can't tell at this stage. One thing that I thought about that changes your context is that as your relationship develops, romance and attraction converts and evolves into commitment. So God puts in our hearts and in our minds and bodies a desire, a physical desire for one another, and it's not to say that that disappears or goes away. There's always romance and there's always the physical, but at the early stages of a relationship, that's where the energy is. That's where the focus is. You know, that's your drive to be with one another. That's real big focus of the relationship. But as time progresses and you get married and so forth, then the romance and all of that converts to the way you express the relationship is more in your commitment to one another. And essentially, rather than simply wanting to be with each other, your love is expressed in being partners in life. You know, we help each other achieve things in life. You know, we support each other as parents. We give each other time and space to achieve and grow and all of that. So you become partners. And when there are challenges, you support each other. So the romance and all of that is still there, but it's not that energy and that focus. The focus is, well, you know, you're my best friend in life and you're my partner in life. Let's do this and let's do it well together. So everything changes. But still you're being expected to make a decision with limited information for long term. So how do we do that? So the verse I have up there, can somebody read it? Sorry, anyone? George?
A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps.
So you are a part of the process. So you do have to engage mentally with this process as to who to choose, when to choose, and how to go about doing it. But the Lord directs your steps. So God has his plan for you. He will find his way to guide you. But how you have to be involved in the process, and you have to be involved with God in order for him to be able to do that, to be able to guide you. So we'll look at practical ways of doing that. But just to highlight that, that you are a part of the process, but it's God whose plan comes to effect if you surrender to him. Okay. Oh, is that right? Am I controlling it? No, okay. Okay, all right. I think I changed the slide since I printed it, sorry. It is scary that separation and divorce as a church statistic is growing. Why is it growing? So I hesitated to even put that up there because I don't want to make light of people's individual experiences. It's very sad, but it does happen. And again, no couple has the same experience as another. No, you know, it's not. I'm not here to judge one way or the other. But as the reality is, it seems to be growing as an occurrence in the church and outside the church. So why is that the case? And again, you can't put it down to one particular thing. This is purely an opinion and just getting some feedback on things. But essentially, your attitude and your expectations going into a relationship, or the partner's attitude and expectation going in, are we going in with the right attitude? And do we have the right expectations going into it? So we're going to, again, it's going to go back to how we shift the way we think about the one that we're searching for. But so there are so many different reasons a relationship might fail. And again, you might not foresee it. Like, you're sitting here and you think, I'm not going to make those mistakes. You know, I'm going to apply everything I hear tonight. I'm not going to make those mistakes. It happens to people who don't want it to happen to them. You know, like it happens to people who don't expect it. Happens to people who feel like, you know, I did all the right things. And so again, it's really hard to give advice, to give definites, to really, but we have to trust that if I do commit my focus to God and not the other person, if I commit my search to God, then in His mercy and grace, He will protect me. So we'll leave it at that and go on. Next slide, please. Thank you. Sorry. We're about to watch a video, which is, it's only 5 minutes, but it just kind of hits nail on the head, and it just redefines how we approach this search. So we've kind of clarified a few things, but in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is that famous chapter on love, the second last verse, sorry, I left the Bible on my seat. So 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. So after it describes all the ways you can show love, it says in verse 12, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known." So I'm not sure if there are multiple ways of reading it. The way that I understand this is, for now we see in a mirror dimly. So my vision of the future, my vision of God's will is blurred. But then face to face. So face to face with who? Face to face, the way I read it, is with God. So my journey on earth is to see God, is to be with Him in heaven. So now my vision of how that's going to happen, how I'm going to get there, the journey I'm going to take, that's blurred. But in time, I will see Him face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. But then I shall know, so when I'm face to face with Him, I will know just as I also am known, which is that Christ is in me. So if I'm looking at Christ, and that's a revelation of who He is, but it's also a revelation of what His plan is for me, and that is to be with Him. So my vision of the future isn't clear, but Christ is revealed in me if I pursue love, basically. So if I live a life of virtue, specifically of love, if I love people, and if I, in a relationship, show genuine love, then through that, God will reveal his will and he will reveal himself to me. So in all your decision making, in all your interactions with this person or with other people, pursue love, and God will either make it fail or make it succeed in its time, with the assurance that this journey is to lead to seeing who Christ is and understanding his will in your life. So just before we watch that video, just a really quick recap. So in searching for a partner, I am trying to make a long-term decision with limited information or short-term information. So basically, I can't do that alone. I need to have divine intervention. The second point, which is a little bit on the side, that romance and attraction evolves, so it's a growth, it evolves to commitment. So while we are trying to make a decision now, we're kind of driven and motivated by one aspect of the relationship that really takes a back seat later when your relationship is defined by your commitment to one another, by the way you support one another. And that in itself is lovely as well. And that growing in virtue of love helps to reveal God's will for me. And also that we need to adjust our attitude and expectations as we go into relationships. So again, this will kind of all wrap it up together, and then we'll kind of think of some practical ideas together. So can you play the video, please? Does anybody have any comments or questions so far? Oh, sorry. Yes.
I haven't experienced what's going on, but I have a question. What if you show too much love, like godly love, and then they get too attached? Okay? So, isn't showing too much love sometimes a bad thing? Because they can, like, oh yeah, I like you, then they'll go to it.
Are you talking in the context of friendship or relationship? If you show too much love in a relationship and then they get... Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I think, yeah, look, if it's, the potential is that relationships won't work in that early stage. That's why we engage with one another. That's why we go out dating. It's about gathering that information and trying to make a decision. So you have to be ready for it to fail as well. But that doesn't mean that you go into it cautiously in a way that you don't express love. I think you have to be genuine, you have to be in the moment, you have to be honest. And then if you've given it your all, both of you, and it's not working for one or both of you, then you both have to be ready to leave. And that might...
You guys' questions.
Oh, sorry, it's working now. But if it may cause heartache, which is unfortunate, but it's better at the early stage than later. But I don't think you should be reserved in your expression because you think it might fail, unless you already know it's not going well. Like, if you're honest in it, you live in the moment. But live in the moment in the sense that you express love appropriately. And then if things don't progress and it fails, then it does, and unfortunately that's what has to happen, but it's best for the future. Yeah. So I wouldn't pursue a relationship because I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. You have to be honest to show love, and also to say it's just not working as well. Okay, anyway, we'll watch the video.
When I put out the tweet in the Facebook status that asked for you guys' questions, one of the biggest ones I got, also with the most likes, was how do you know someone's the one? And kind of fit with that is, how do I know I'm in God's will? Now, I really want to answer that one because I also struggled with that one for years. I would sit down and I would read the Bible, and I would open and try to find exact passages to fit exact decisions in life. And to be honest, it kind of left me depressed because I could never find an exact answer. I would treat the scriptures almost like they were a fortune cookie and like a roadmap to life, looking for this one thing that tells me about my life. But my view has totally changed on what the scriptures are, because I realize they're not just little cookie cutter answers for me and my life. They're actually a grand narrative, huge story about one man, Jesus, and how he redeems humanity and how he redeems people who trust in him. And so when I started seeing that differently, it started to change my view of kind of those questions. And so the way I'd answer that question is, how do you know someone's the one? Now, this might depress someone, and this might, make some of you like lose the Disney type fairy tale dream, but I don't think there's such thing. I think you've watched too much Disney and too much The Notebook and read too much Nicholas Sparks if you think there's the one. Now, why do I say that? First is, just logically, if there is the one, then if a guy 3,000 years ago married the wrong person who wasn't the one, that means he must have tore down the lineage all the way down into history, because he married someone else's one, and that person has to marry someone else's one. And so it just doesn't logically work, because if there's one, and if one person messes it up, then it doesn't work anymore. And secondly, I've realized that it puts way too much pressure on the other person. Usually the girl's the one that kind of has that idea of, I'm looking for the one and looking for that perfect person. And what happens is you uphold this ideal that only Jesus and God can satisfy, and then you put a burden on that, and it crushes him. No matter how good he is to you, no matter how much he serves you, you want him to be even a little bit more. Just a little bit more, do a little bit better. And so the truth is, for guys and girls out there, it's not about finding the one, it's about preparing yourself to be the one. Because a lot of times, if we can be honest, we're just lazy. We want to find the one because they make our life easy. They have all the attributes that fit perfectly with our life, so that we don't have to change, or we don't have to maneuver or restructure our life. But God actually says marriage, which, the preemptive of that is dating, is to make us holy more than to make us happy. It's about making us look like him. And so I would say there's no such thing as the one. You don't have to struggle with the pressure of trying to think there is the one, and that God's going to get mad at you if you pick the wrong one. And concentrate on yourself. Put yourself in church community. Surround yourself with awesome people who help you grow and help you learn. Try to say, how can I become a person that will better serve that spouse? Because what happens is, if you believe in that one, then when they mess up or when they do something that makes you mad, you kind of are a slave to them because you always react to it. So if you believe in that kind of idol of a person, of a guy or a girl, When they mess up, or when you get in an argument, you get depressed, or you struggle, or it makes you sad. But if you're resting and putting your identity in who God is and how He's lined you up to be with Him, then when that person does mess up or does fail you, because your identity is not in that person, you can give them forgiveness and you can give them love. But if you're attached to them as your identity, you can never do that. You always react based upon what they do. And so you can have freedom to just pick. Now, if you're in unrepentant sin or you're not in church community, then yeah, you might pick the wrong person. But I totally believe if you're in church community, if you have a good group of godly mentors, people above you, and if you're not in any unrepentant sin, no secret sin, and you're just being transparent and walking with Jesus and Bible study and prayer, it's kind of scandalous to say, but pick whoever you want. Pick whoever you want. I mean, does it bother anyone that in Acts chapter 1, the apostles actually drew straws to see who would become the next apostle? They trusted God so much because they were in intimacy with Him, in relationship with Him, they trusted Him to pick who would be the right one. And so I would say if you're in all those things and you're just walking the journey with Jesus, pick whoever you want. You don't have to have that pressure, because the truth is, it's not about finding the one, it's just about treating that person with love, grace, forgiveness, and mercy. And you can do that with anyone. You can do that with this person, or that person. And it takes all this pressure off and all this burden off the relationship. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is, one of the worst parts about having the one, or upholding a standard that no one can meet, that absolutely no one can meet, because none of us are perfect except Jesus. The worst part about upholding that standard is that you miss good, godly people all around you. You miss that you're walking by your future spouse every single day because your standard is so high, you'll never actually find that person. And so when you understand that God gives you freedom to choose when you're living in community, you're living in intimacy with Him, then what happens is you start to notice people in your life who might make a good partner to be on mission with you, to do what God has called you to do.
So when I watched that, does that kind of, do people agree with what he said, or? Yeah.
So, just a question regarding like some of the things he said towards the end about if you've got the one, then you don't really need any other criteria. Does that mean that we shouldn't have things that we judge, not so much judge, but assess another person by? So does that mean we have to get rid of any standard or any sort of criteria that we might have in a partner that would be more compatible with us?
No, I think, like we were saying before, it is a process. You have to think about it. God says, you plan the path, or you plan, what's the word? A man's heart plans his way. So you think about it. Are we compatible? Like, can we even stand to be in the same room together? Do we have similar interests? Do we make decisions in a similar way? Are our priorities in line? Can I, encourage his interests or her interests? And so you do need to think about that. But I think his point is that if your focus is God, if God is your first love, and you go into a relationship with the attitude of, I'm here to do my best for this person, not to expect of them, then that is your assurance that it will work in that sense. That if you are ready to say sorry, if you're self-sacrificing, if you are a good listener, if you communicate well, if you do your part, then that's assurance that it would work. But it's two-way as well. But it doesn't mean that we go in blindly and we just pick randomly, and so you still think there's still a decision to make. Yeah. Any other?
Yeah, so I didn't like it when he said, pick whoever you want.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm a good person, godly, I'm going to work with it. But what about the person you picked is not like loving God, or he doesn't like to go to church. I saw lots of examples. People are married, some people from outside, they're nice and that, but then later on they grab them out of the church because they're different. Like he tried his best, happy, but you know, it's so the different things. So he can't say pick whoever you want because you're gonna treat this person good, but that's
I think what he's saying is that if you are in communion with God, then even if you feel like you could just choose anybody, that your choice will be godly because you are in that relationship with God. So he's saying that essentially you can make your decision comfortably and confidently if your focus is God. Does that make sense? If your focus isn't on that person. So you still, again, are thinking through the decision, you are being discerning, you're being critical of your decision, but at the end of the day, if your focus is God and if your attitude in going into a relationship is to be selfless and all those qualities, then when you have made a calculated decision, you can be sure that the person, whoever it is that you chose, you know, by God's grace, the relationship will work.
that makes sense. That's really good.
Yeah.
It's not like I thought he's like depends on him, like he's the main creator in that position, and you know, so I thought like he's focusing on himself to fix any situation, not the other partner. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
that makes sense if he's like guide way, and he picked the right person. I think that would be good.
Yeah.
Thank you. That makes
I mean-
sense. Yeah. Thank you.
No, so I think that's, unless someone else. Yeah.
I actually liked how he says that if you're basically in the shelter of God, spiritual leaders, which would be our priests, guiding our decision. I also do like I can relate to how he says the one, and then when you're upset with the one, what, I made a mistake, he's no longer the one. Like this is post-marriage. If you hang your ideal on the magical one, and then that magical one disappoints, then oh my gosh, I've made a mistake, I hate my life, you know, he's not the one. But when you believe in the intervention of the Lord, and you have, like you said, surrendered yourself to God, and you've made what you believe, you've prayed about it, you've made a decision with the guidance of the confession, Father, you've surrendered your life, you believe that they're a spiritual person as well, and you've married them, then you give the relationship to God to resolve anything. So I love that this one out of the equation, and that we are sheltered when we are in communion with God in this sanctuary that we live in this community. So I mean, I can understand some, like, you know, forget about whatever, but I really can see it. Yeah.
And I think it's about changing the focus. So it's not saying, again, that you're not being discerning in your decision and you're not being thoughtful. It's basically saying change your focus on that search for the one to an inward, which is where kind of we framed this talk about, which is searching for the one or the right partner for yourself is about an internal process where I assess my priorities and make God my focus, and focus on what I'm offering in a relationship. So am I going to be patient? Am I going to listen? Am I going to communicate well? Am I going to put their needs and priorities first? What can I offer rather than I need someone who's funny, who is generous, and I need somebody who is this and who is that, and rather than going in with the mindset of a checklist of what you want in a person, the idea is that yes, you will naturally filter through people very instinctively. Like, you know, you engage in social circles, straight away there's attraction, there's interest, people feel familiar very quickly. Like there's something happening beyond the words that help you feel attraction to someone. So there's something naturally happening. But so beyond that, you need to also be focused on what you will offer in the relationship, and building up your virtues. And you do that by building up your qualities and virtues in your current relationships. So with your parents, with your siblings, with your, colleagues and friends and even strangers. Focus on how you deal with all of those people and build up your patience in those relationships. Communicate well with them, show love and kindness. You're building up the skills that you'll need in a relationship, and then you're building up the skills that you're offering to someone. So again, rather than focusing on, I'm looking for someone who will put my needs first, I'm looking for someone who I can do that for. And I think with that mindset, God protects you, God guides you, and reveals his will to you. So again, it's just shifting. So I then wanted to just quickly focus on a couple of practical things. Sorry. So what are some things that I can do to build myself up to being the one for someone else? Any ideas? It's not a tricky question. It's pretty standard. Very good. Lovely. Anything else specific? What's the one, it's almost the answer to most questions we get asked at church, but how am I in communion with God daily? How can I be in communion with God daily? Prayer. So unless I'm actively praying before, during, and after the process of finding someone, prayer is your security. It is your communion with God. It is your opportunity to put your decisions at his feet. It is your way of feeling his presence. It's your way of showing him that you're putting the decision in his hands. So he knows what you need. He knows what your question is, but he says you need to ask. Knock and the door will be open. You need to take that step to show that you want communion with God. Unless you do, he's going to sit back and wait. He might give you signs and nudges, but he is not intrusive. He will wait for you. But the second you fall to your knees or you lift up your eyes and your mind in prayer, he will answer very quickly, especially if you've gone through a bit of a drought in prayer. If you feel like you haven't been connecting with God in that way, I assure you that the first time you pray after a while of not praying, he will answer you immediately. And that's his way of saying, I've been waiting, and I'm not going to let you go. So he will answer you quickly. So prayer is your assurance in everything. And it gives you confidence in making decisions. It makes you peaceful about making decisions. And it's God's invitation to guide your decision as well. So prayer is critical at every stage of the decision. What else? So be like Christ, pray. So how can I build up myself to be the one for someone else? Is that a hand? Yeah. Serve? Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, Carol.
I read this book recently. I've told everybody about the book. It's called The ABCs of Marriage. Yes, that's the one. And in the book, actually, I learned a lot about, you read it and then you really realise what you need to be in a successful relationship. And I know some singles have read the book, but I can say firsthand, it would even help married people or people in relationships but definitely people thinking about relationships, because it really sets the scene on the type of characteristics that you need. You know, you do need humility and meekness and all, like, you know, there's the whole alphabet in the book. So, you know, but definitely reading books like that and the Bible and taking it literally on yourself to purify yourself would be good to prepare yourself for another person.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Any other ideas? Andrew?
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice? Yeah. What kind of sacrifice?
Everything.
Everything. So the next question will lead into, so this is more about yourself individually, what you can be doing. So in that sense, a sacrifice could be, like he was saying, that, you know, it's difficult to have assurance in your decisions if you're caught up in an unrepentant sin, he says. So if you're not striving against your sins, then again that blurs your ability to make decisions. But you have, I mean, we fall, but it's about that striving against it and repentance. So making sacrifices in terms of sin and fighting sin. Sacrifices if you wanted to fast, if you're kind of trying to make that decision, you could sacrifice in that way. Mario, did you have something?
There is lines up to where you can sacrifice. For example, there is values that you cannot sacrifice, obviously, like, for example, leaving the church for someone, or you have, like, to do a sin maybe to please someone. Like, these kind of values, you cannot give it up.
You can't sacrifice what, sir?
Like there is a line for a sacrifice. You cannot sacrifice like everything, like Chloe said.
Okay, I think the idea of the sacrifice was a sacrifice given to God in the hope of His guidance, and so not a sacrifice in a relationship. It's sacrifice in preparation for making those decisions. So basically, preparing myself is about communion with God, is about opening up those channels where God can guide me, and that I can work on my virtues, on my abilities, on the things that I want to be able to offer in a relationship. So again, practicing good virtue and good relationship skills in my current relationships, parents, siblings, friends, or if you're in a relationship already, you know, really building what you're offering to them, you know, biting your tongue when you feel like you want to argue about something, stopping to think about their perspective before your own. So really practicing what you can offer as opposed to expecting from them.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly that. Like, we could look at the lens that we were going to use to, you know, critique somebody and their, you know, capacity as a spouse, and use that exact same criteria and turn it onto ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are we looking for somebody who's going to sacrifice? Okay, do I sacrifice? Are we looking for somebody who's going to take me to church? Okay, do I go to church? Like, something like that, like to use the same lens we're using against somebody else onto ourselves to see if, you know, we're able to even at the very least meet them halfway.
Yeah, 100%. And I think shifting that focus as well is fair, because it's not fair for me to go into a relationship and have all these expectations, but I spent no time preparing myself to offer the same thing. And in this book, when it talks about different skills and virtues in a relationship, one of the things it says, a positive attitude is contagious. You know, so in a relationship, if you're positive, they will be positive. If you encourage them, they will encourage you. You know, like, so again, by offering those things that you want in a you will get them back. They will come back to you, because it's very hard for someone who, even if they're naturally an angry or, you know, quick to anger person, if they're met with someone who is calm, relaxed, doesn't retaliate, it's very hard to keep arguing with someone like that. And you start to build those skills that they're demonstrating. So again, when I build my skills, I will enjoy that in return just by the nature of it being kind of contagious in a relationship. So the final kind of thought is, sorry, next 2 slides away, sorry. A concept that Abuna introduced last week, someone had asked him a question about, do I choose someone the same spiritual level as myself or not? And he introduced the idea of having a common spiritual orientation. So it's nothing you can judge saying, am I spiritual, more spiritual than they? There isn't really that comparison to make. What we should be focused on is, do we have the same goal? Are we on the same spiritual orientation? Are we both facing the same way? Are we both headed the same way? We might be at different locations along the way. That's okay. We might have different journey, but are we both focused? So I first focused on building myself up for a relationship. Now I may be in one. How do we, in this kind of dating phase, ensure that we're on the right track, that we can be actively thinking and making a decision while we're in this situation, and how do we get clarity about that decision? And it's important in this phase to get the same orientation towards God. So both be equally committed to church, encourage one another in the service, do spiritual exercises together. Doesn't have to be physically together. You can just encourage each other and say, well, let's read every night a particular book or from the Bible, or do something regular together. Even pray when you're together. And include God as you come together as well, so in your relationship. So maybe it could be because you do things in a church setting, like so you go in the social circles of church, or you participate in church events and things together, or you include God through prayer together, whether individually together or physically together. And one thing Abuna said last week, I know I'm just regurgitating his talk, but meet with a purpose, which I thought was really nice. It's not just about being together. It's about we're investigating. We're trying to figure out, is this right for us? I'd like to get to know you. I want to kind of understand how you do think about things, what your priorities are. So it doesn't all have to be serious discussions, but just being in each other's presence all the time without purpose, without kind of a filtering in my mind, without kind of being discerning and thinking through it, isn't ideal. So again, we meet with a purpose, we're honest about our intentions, and another thing is to set boundaries. So in the dating phase, of course, physical attraction is very important. It's very much a part of that experience. But you need to set some limits and boundaries. And that's your protection, because you haven't made a decision. You're not committed yet. And if you engage together in physical activity, you kind of put yourself in a really tricky spot. Because if it doesn't work out, then it's really difficult. And Abuna gave that great example of, if someone was going to be ordained a priest next week, he can't just rock up and perform the liturgy because, well, I'm going to get ordained next week. He has to be ordained before he can engage in that kind of activity. And the same with marriage and physical activity. So be really honest with each other. Don't kind of flirt with sin. Set boundaries before you're kind of in that position. And if for your own protection, be in groups. And that again helps set your orientation that we are in this relationship, but for the sake of the long run. And We've put the decision in God's hands. Again, if you engage physically, you're taking the decision out of God's hands. You're not respecting his time to make that decision for you. So be wise, set boundaries, and again, that's part of keeping your focus on God and not on each other. And again, make sacrifices, as was said before, and that could be together or individually. Any other suggestions? That's pretty much all we have. Then there's one more slide. Sorry. So just finally, if you do all these things, if you focus on God as an individual, if you focus on God in your relationship together, if you work on yourself rather than coming into a relationship with expectation, but rather you work on what you would like to offer to someone, what are the traits and virtues you want to offer someone. And if through this whole process you commit your decision to God through prayer, then you need to trust in God and be patient. And again, remember that, yes, you are engaged in this decision. You do need to be thoughtful about it. But at the end of the day, God directs you, and God will bring his plan to light, again, if you focus on him. That's it. Any questions or thoughts? Or
I just wanted to suggest a prayer, and I use it all the time whenever I have to make a decision, and it's in the Agbeya. I'll just get an Agbeya. It's called the prayer for decision making. Does anyone know it? Does anyone pray it? Yeah? No? Oh, okay. Yes? Anyone? Chris McGalley. Is it okay, Kat? Would you mind if I read the prayer? Yeah. Dear Lord, you are aware that I do not know what is good for me, but now that I'm about to start ... How do I know what is right unless you guide me with your grace? O Lord, I beseech your guidance in this matter. Do not let me follow my own tendencies, lest I be confused and fall. Keep me from slipping. Help me. Let it be according to your will. If you see it fit, grant me your blessing to complete it. If not, remove the desire from my heart. You know all things. Nothing is concealed from you. Lord, I am your servant. Deal with me as you see fit, as I realize I will neither have success nor peace unless I submit myself to the grace of your will. Teach me to say on every occasion, let it be according to your will, O Lord, and not according to mine. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you so much for that talk, Kat. I know I personally benefited, and I'm sure everyone benefited. I especially like the point about coming to God as the one and him helping us to find someone else, because Abuna Anthony Messiah actually comments on that, and he says every single person has the one. Every single person has just one, and that person is the one for them. But that person is God, and it's only by finding God as the one that he will lead us to the two, which is exactly what you were saying about finding and committing ourselves to God, and only through committing to him will he help us and direct our path, like the way that a man's heart plans his ways, but God will direct his steps, exactly. And I know that I personally really benefited from that. We just have one announcement.